our ability to actually accurately discern and comprehend, much less be persuaded, essentially tanks when we are just fighting with each other rhetorically. And I think you can compare the way that we are engaging now with each other, screaming at each other on social media, hate tweeting and the like, with the way that Jesus interacted, which was, as you mentioned, Raymond, he told stories, he walked around with people, he asked a lot of questions. And this is the only guy who actually did have all the answers.
Hello everyone, I'm Dennis Allen. Welcome to the Disciple Dilemma. Let's talk about statesmanship, citizenship, and discipleship. Is it even possible to put those together in today's society with all of the arguments, politics, tribes, and cancel that we've got going on? Well, we have the right person with us today to have that conversation. Cherie Harder is the president of the Trinity Forum, one of the fantastic forums for Christian thought leaders in America and around the world. But her resume adds an awful lot to the conversation too. Cherie served in the White House as a special assistant to President George W. Bush, and she was the Director of Policy and Projects for First Lady Laura Bush. Cherie was a Magna Cum Laude graduate in government from Harvard University and a Rotary Scholar at the University of Queensland, Brisbane, Australia. And on top of that, Cherie gets to hang out with an awful lot of fantastic Christian thought leaders who talk and think a lot about how Christians should think and act in America today. So let's join Cherie and Raymond and have a conversation about statesmanship, citizenship, and discipleship. Is that even possible? Cherie Harder, we are so grateful that you would join us today on the Disciple Dilemma podcast.
Great to be here.
And Raymond, I'm really thrilled you're here no matter which school you graduated from.
Thank you. I know it's a burden for me, but I'm trying to bear it gladly in Christ. Yeah.
Cherie, you're the president of the Trinity Forum, and a lot of people who are watching this podcast probably don't have much exposure to that, but we've got a lot of pastors and thought and change leaders who are probably watching us and going, what is that? Can you give us the what and the why of Trinity Forum?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for the question. I did hear that you recently hosted our founder, Oz Guinness, on the Disciple Dilemma. Oz and Al McDonald founded the Trinity Forum a little over 30 years ago in 1991 with the aim of cultivating, curating, disseminating the best of Christian thought leadership, connecting leading thinkers with thinking leaders, and ultimately providing a place where leaders can grapple with the big questions of life in the context of faith. And so we try to do that through a variety of programs and publications. Our programs including online conversations where I get the pleasure of interviewing some of the world's most fascinating people on the big questions of life, our in-person events, our reading groups, but also our Trinity Forum readings, where 4 times a year we take some of the best of literature and letters that deal with big questions, including spiritual questions, and add an introduction at the beginning, giving context, and then discussion questions in the back so that they essentially function like a book club in a bag. So through a process of reading, conversation, and discussion, we hope to provide a place where leaders can grapple more deeply with the big questions of life and ultimately come to better know the author of the answers.
Cherie, this sounds suspiciously to me like there's a hidden agenda of discipleship underneath the structure you just described. How would you answer that?
Well, I would plead guilty to that. Part of what we believe and we try to embody and facilitate is that, well, first of all, one of the first commandments is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. One's mind is included. And what we think about is largely a result of what we pay attention to, what we reflect on, the things that we do, the people that we love, our habits, our embodied practices, our convictions. And what we are trying to do is to help others, and especially leaders, pay attention to, reflect on, trust in godly wisdom, and develop more of a sense of both confidence and curiosity in sorting out those big questions and thinking deeply and faithfully about what matters most.
Really, people's stories are every bit as important as their theology or their philosophical framework. And so how do you balance the sort of motivational or narrative requirements to really bring people to a place to see we're in a different place in history that may need different ways of approaching people? When we have this history of rational discourse where we think if we have the right argument and we say it persuasively, then we will change the world.
It's a great question. I'm not sure I have the total answer, but I do think part of the answer is I think one can look around and realize that's not working so well. Right now, our public discourse, certainly our political discourse, is largely filled with people shouting past each other, asserting their truths, not really hearing, not really listening, and going kind of ever more apocalyptic in their rhetoric and antagonistic in their approach. And there are tons of studies out about how that actually doesn't work to persuade people. I forget where it was from, but there was a recent study out that studied something called the nasty effect that basically found that as soon as a conversation or even an article, much less social media post, got invoked any kind of ad hominem attack, people essentially not only stopped listening, but their ability to comprehend what was being said diminished. It also really affected the way people perceived the other argument, in that if one person presented argument A, someone responded with rebuttal B, and rebuttal B was quite not only intense, but uncivil. A lot of people would assume that argument A had itself been more uncivil and insulting. Just our ability to actually accurately discern and comprehend, much less be persuaded, essentially tanks when we are just fighting with each other rhetorically. And I think you can compare the way that we are engaging now with each other, screaming at each other on social media, hate tweeting and the like, with the way that Jesus interacted, which was, as you mentioned, Raymond, he told stories, he walked around with people, he asked a lot of questions. And this is the only guy who actually did have all the answers.
Diversity, unity and diversity is fundamental to our Christian faith. Whether you're talking about the Trinity or marriage, we are different, but we're united. We're one.
Just a couple of things you said to pick up on. The first point you made, I think, is a really important one, in that showing intellectual hospitality is not the same as squishiness or relativism or there is no truth. What do we know? It's unknowable. Not at all. I think for the Christian, we do believe that there are truths to discover, and there is a truth that we worship. Right. But we also, as you said earlier, should have a robust understanding that our ability to always perceive it accurately can be limited. Yes. And that should give us a certain humility, as well as kind of whet, our curiosity. And then another thing you said that I just would love to kind of double click on a bit was, kind of where you find your identity, where you find your sense of security. That makes, that's one of the most important things. And one of the things I think we have seen is this sort of retreat into, highly politicized rhetoric, over the top political combat has kind of coincided with more of our identity being in the political and less of our identity being in other forms of community. There have been a lot of studies out there showing how, in the aggregate, we have fewer close friends. We are less likely to be involved in church or volunteering or seeing our family regularly or seeing friends regularly. on the whole, we have less not only embodied interaction with each other, but stable, long-term, formative friendships.
Right.
But we're made for relationship. And when we don't have it, we go looking for love in the wrong places. And we increasingly find that online. And of course, what are all algorithms kind of set for? They're trying to grab attention. They're all about what is sensational, what is extreme, what is urgent. And all that grabs our attention, but it's not particularly good for reflection or understanding or further discovery. And so essentially, we're getting more and more sucked into information streams that are tailor-made to make us angry and upset and kind of addicted. And then we find our tribes by other people who feel the same way. So essentially, our identities are getting more political, and our politics are essentially getting more extreme, unpleasant, and apocalyptic.
One of the fascinating things, one of Dennis's key points in the book, which I think is really just brilliant, is that becoming a disciple is really what we're supposed to be. It's not really about conversion and getting my get out of hell free card. It's really about becoming that person that follows Christ. And when you look at it, Jesus says, the most important commandment I'm going to give you is to love one another. So it seems to me one of the challenges that we face and you face is how do we reignite the notion that the characteristic of a disciple is not they're an effective evangelist. They should be an effective evangelist, but that's not the key point of their life. What they're supposed to be is in love with one another, it's really doing things of self-sacrifice for other people. So how within the Trinity thing, you've got to be dealing with this problem directly in terms of even within the scope of people you have that are part of your organization. How do you really bring that together in a sense of community and commonality?
Well, what's coming to mind is two people that I'll talk about a little bit. Henry Nouwen once talked about how hospitality is not essentially about changing people. It's about opening up a space in which change could potentially occur. And usually preceding any kind of change, someone has to be drawn towards change. And usually you're drawn because of something that you see that really appeals to you. Its goodness or its truth or its beauty or the love of it is what draws you in. And over time, you find that your thinking starts changing, your actions start changing, your habits start changing, your orientation starts changing. That's essentially kind of what changes. It's what discipleship is. But rarely, I do not know of people who have been harangued into change. Usually that caused people to flee rather than to be reformed. And another, a wonderful example of this, you may have known Dallas Willard, who used to be a Trinity Forum Senior Fellow. It's been almost 10 years since he passed away, but is someone who I think just really exemplified that. It was an utterly brilliant professor of philosophy. And yet anytime you talked with him, you were kind of struck by the sense that he actually seemed fully there. And I'm sure people spoke all manner of absurd nonsense to him. I think that's probably just part of what comes with being a professor of philosophy. But there was such a graciousness. He was one of those people who just smelled like Jesus. And you wanted to be around him and you wanted to hear what he had to say and you wanted to hear what he thought. And it was because he seemed to reflect something beautiful.
Folks, when we come back, we're going to continue talking with Cherie Harder, the president of Trinity Forum. And just so you get an idea of the gravitas in the room, while she has been talking about a lot of other names, this is a Magna Cum Laude Harvard in government. This is a Queensland graduate under a Rotary Scholarship. So we are already in kind of that black star mass gravitational pull of the intellectual here, along with Dr. Monroe, who as a manufacturing engineer, continues to confuse me in everything that he says. But having said that, when we come back, we want to talk a little bit about the specific agenda for our conversation today and ask Cherie to talk to us about statesmanship and citizenship. She's talked with a lot of people about this, and we want to try to distill down some of her thoughts of 2022, some of the conversations she's had. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Folks, welcome back to our conversation with Cherie Harder, the president of Trinity Forum. And I'm going to open up with this question, Cherie. You have had names like N.T. Wright and Os Guinness and Maki Fujimura. You've had people like Rachel Denhollander on here and Andy Crouch and David Bailey. And so we're thinking, Cherie, that you have been able to distill all of our questions down to some really simple 30-second answers on what's going on with this crowd of people with statesmanship, citizenship, and discipleship. So in 30 seconds, could you give us two comprehensive examples of how we fix this problem in America?
Oh, wouldn't we all love it if I could? Unfortunately, I'm not sure it can be boiled down to two simple statements, but I will take a stab at that. I think there are several things going on, and some of this we talked about a little bit before. One, I think there's an epistemic crisis. And what I mean by that is we are more confused and there's more chaos and confusion around what is true. And we see that playing out in terms of big and deeply hostile divides about everything from different conspiracy theories to matters of public health to the outcomes of certain elections and the like. And that sort of deep epistemic divide also reflects, I think, a crisis of trust. And part of our confusion is that we increasingly do not all trust the same people or the same institutions or the same sources. And so increasingly, we are living in different realities. One of the real challenges is that pluralism has helped us navigate a diverse democratic society where people have different ideas of which policy is better than the other, or different ideas of the good. We have not yet been confronted with a different society, wrestling or reconciling a society that not only has different ideas about what is good or bad, or better and best, but what's true or false, real or unreal. And so this is sort of new territory that we are moving into. And combined with that and related to it is we have a real, I think, crisis of loneliness in that relationships are breaking down, institutions are breaking down. We are less likely to have a large group of personal friends, deep personal friends that we can talk to. We are less likely in the aggregate to be involved with formative institutions, institutions that actually ask something of us rather than just something that we can basically consume from. And as a result, we're becoming more atomized. And essentially a crisis of confusion and conspiracy, of trust and of loneliness all go together and kind of, I think, are part of why we're in the situation we're in now.
So this, to me, is a fantastic big picture view. This is a wonderful meta narrative on some of the dynamics that you're seeing and sensing and what you're hearing from some of the people who are working with the Trinity Forum. I suspect a lot of people are sitting out there watching this and going, okay, Cherie, what do you want me to do with respect to statesmanship? I'm not in the State Department. I'm not part of the administration. What do you guys at Trinity Forum want out of us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and that's a great question. But there's several things I'll sort of say in response. One, we very happily live in a democratic republic where it's not just a few oligarchs or a monarch who are making all the decisions. There are still a lot of decisions made by we, the people, and how we engage with others, how we engage with information, all has a real civic impact. And I also think, just as Christians, we're called to be good citizens. And there's a lot of Christian literature and studies on what does that mean? And people from Augustine to Aquinas and others who've tackled that question, what it means to love God while being rooted, in the city of man, and how that plays out. And there's a lot of consensus around the fact that loving God and loving one's neighbor also means seeking justice and seeking the flourishing of one's neighbor and the flourishing of the place that one lives. And so living that out, while there's not an easy answer or 3 steps about here's what we do, it requires thought and intentionality and imagination and creativity and prayer to discern what that call looks like in one's individual situation. But happily, we are all in a place where we can make a difference in the place that we live, in the neighborhoods that we're in, and with the people that we live with and love.
I love what you're saying here, because this is such a rare conversation about discipleship. You're telling each one of us, live in the community that God has placed and called you to be in love and hospitality, in the fullest definition of agape as love, and the fullest definition of hospitality, the hospitos, that God has called us to start reshaping society. Am I hearing you right, Cherie?
You're hearing me right.
What would you, this is attempt to be a little more diplomatic about that first incredibly unfair question I asked you, but if you think back over 2022, what haunts you with a sentence or two about some of the things that you heard in 2022 from the people speaking? And by the way, folks, Trinity Forum's got an excellent 2022 recap video out there that has lots of this, but let's put Cherie on the spot and just say, what haunted you with 1 or 2 conversations with regard to statesmanship, citizenship, and discipleship?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. We had a lot of really rich conversations. A few things that sort of stuck out that were haunting and were sobering. In a conversation with David French, David is a columnist who actually just became a columnist for the New York Times, but was talking with David about trust, truth, faith, and conspiracy. And one of the things that he said that was sobering is that by some measures, self-reported evangelicals are the most likely demographic group to affirm certain theories, certain conspiracy theories, including, say, aspects of Q, as well as different vaccine conspiracies. One would hope that Christians would be the most discerning, the wisest, the slowest, the least likely to be sucked in by conspiracy. Now, there may well be there's reasons for that, but that was a sobering statistic. Another thing that was pointed out, and I forget who said this, it might have been Jonathan Haidt, maybe it was someone else, but they pointed to a Washington Post study that showed that as we've gotten more polarized, just the amount of anger and alienation has increased. And we're now at a point where roughly 20% of each side of the ideological spectrum, the ends, think that the country would be better off if large portions of the other side died.
Whoa.
Now, obviously, that's not modeling a Christian a Christian view, but you also think about the fact that we are blessed and fortunate enough to live in a democratic republic, and there's challenges that come with living with and finding ways to flourish with our neighbors with whom we disagree and have different views of what is good. But if we see our neighbors as if the world would be better off without them, finding peaceful and positive ways of resolving difference are going to be a lot more difficult. So that also stuck out as a sobering bit of information.
As we wrap up today, Cherie, I would like to ask you for sort of your closing moment on what you want people to hear, both from the heart today, but as well in the mission of Trinity Forum. What would you like to have us be haunted with as we step away from this podcast?
Oh, well, thanks for the question. What I'd love to stick in people's minds is just to reflect on the fact that what we what we give our attention to, what we think about, the information streams and content sources that we focus on, that we give credence to, the relationships we invest in, the habits and practices that we have matter greatly. They form not only what we think about, they form how we think, they form how we see the world. They are formational, and they can be deformational too. And of course, formation is largely what discipleship is about. And the hope for us at the Trinity Forum is by, in essence, setting the table and extending the kind of intellectual hospitality to welcome people to think more deeply about what matters most in the context of faith, will in time encourage them to be formed ever more like he who we worship.
You know what I loved about this conversation today, Raymond, is that, normally, Cherie, we have to set up a preface that says, please, if you're a pastor or you're involved in ministry, don't be offended by some very provocative statements and questions we're going to bring up regarding the state of discipleship. You have presented this today with such beautifully rounded edges that I don't feel like anybody's going to be offended. You have not tried to punch them. You've tried to invite them to the table. You said, this is absolutely cool. I love it.
Thanks, Dennis.
It's great.
Cherie, as we wrap up today, I'd like for you to talk to us about how people can get in touch with Trinity Forum, and how would you like them to connect with Trinity Forum so that they can join the kinds of conversations you're talking about?
Well, I thank you for the question. We would love for people to be involved. Our website is www.ttf.org. We host a variety of programs, and one that's probably the most accessible are our online conversations, where I get the great pleasure of getting to talk with some of the most interesting people in the world about big topics, which happens Fridays, most Fridays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So on our website, we'll have a schedule of those. You can also sign up to be on the invitation list on our website. If you're in the DC area or the Nashville area, we will also have in-person events. And one of the things that we launched recently as a way to encourage and hopefully be a catalyst for more of the kind of conversations that matter is our book club box too, to help people start their own reading groups, reading and discussion groups, to have those kinds of conversations. So those are three ways we'd love for people to interact, but all of that should be on our website, and would love to see people at our next online conversation.
Folks, look, I'm just going to do an ad here for them. If you join Trinity Forum, and if you go to the website, you can see the different levels of membership where you can join. They will not leave you alone with mind-stretching opportunities. You will get the weekly email, read this, check this, and it comes from a wide swath of media and a beautiful assortment of minds. And then you get these kinds of things. Here's The Loss of University, which was a wonderful piece by Wendell Berry, and there's also Jacques Maritain in this particular document, The Aim of Education. And so it's just helping all of us as followers of Christ think more broadly, see the world more clearly, so that we're able to interact with those people more fully, which is precisely what Christ called us to do. 1 Peter 3:15, Paul laid this out: in your heart set apart Christ as Lord, and always be prepared to give an answer to people who ask you for the reason for the hope that's within you. And here, Trinity Forum is handing that out to us. They're setting the table for us. So you're seeing the graphics about ttf.org. That's the website for Trinity Forum. And you're seeing the graphics as we walked along with this. So please don't pass up the opportunity to be a part of that. Cherie, thank you for, first of all, being the president of the Trinity Forum and the beautiful work you all do. And secondly, for being with us today on the Disciple Dilemma. It's
been a real pleasure and an honor. Thanks for inviting me.
And can I just say also, thank you for being the bride of an F-15 Eagle pilot, which is absolutely wonderful. That's the most wonderful people in the world. Thank you for being...
I'm rather happy about that as well.
Raymond, thanks for joining us today and helping us discern what's going on at Trinity Forum.
Oh, it was great fun. Thanks, Dennis. I enjoyed it, and it's wonderful to meet a new friend. Thanks.
Please help us get the word out that discipleship has been hacked. We want to talk about discipleship just like we want to talk about statesmanship and citizenship, as we have today with Cherie Harder from the Trinity Forum. Please follow us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook. We're even out on the RSS feeds. We'd love to have you follow and support us because it helps us get the word out so people can think about discipleship, following Christ, serving Christ. That's what we're here to do, folks. Stick with us, and as always, thanks for listening.